This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome to Basket Case Clubs. I'm Michael Connolly and I'll be your host for this journey as we talk about some basket casey goodness that goes on at local government today. And joining me as usual is my brother, Steve Connolly. Welcome, Steve.
Woohoo! Basket case, local governments.
Doesn't really have the same ring.
No, it
Basket
doesn't.
case councils.
Equally true, though.
Equally true. Yes. So how's your week been, Steve? Any funny stories that you've had happen at Clubland or Council Land this week?
Probably. Got some infighting going on in a number of clubs and rifts in state governing organisations. Well, between people involved in a particular sport from different clubs. And it's a sport where a good percentage of the clubs. So it's a tier 3 sport. And there are around 35 clubs.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Steve doing a really good job at giving away just enough information, but retaining just enough. See, there's still some ambiguity.
It's great when we talk with people who listen to our podcast and they say, every time
you're talking about
are they talking about us? So for some of you, the answer is yes, always. But this sport has about 35 clubs and a good percentage of those clubs, and I've been told the number might be as high as half of those clubs, are the result of breakaways from other clubs. So people who, fall out with other people in the club, strong personalities, coaches, and so on, who then take their little group of people and set up a new club. Or it might be a satellite club of an existing club that operates from a second facility, and then they develop a different ethos and establish their own separate entity. So it's fascinating that a good number, whatever that number is, of the clubs that exist in this sport in Queensland are the result of people disliking each other, breaking away from another club and setting up a newie. So anyway, I think that kind of leads to some deep-seated friction between people and between clubs, which, in their participation arena, gosh, I'm being careful not to give too much away here, in their participation arena, whether that be, on the field, on the court, on the water, whatever, it probably leads to some good rivalries.
Could be on the track.
Good yes, could be track, in the sky,
in the hall, on the floor. Yeah.
So yes, there's always interesting things going on in my life, as there is for all of our CPR group family.
Hey, I'm
stories.
As you know, Steve, I studied music, so I only need to know how to count to 4. Even if it's 12/8, it's just 1 2 3 2 2 3 3 2 3 4 2 3 1 2. So I only need to know how to count to 4. That's okay. So, but I'm going to try some statistics here. If you say it's up to half of those clubs are breakaways, that means that all of them have split. Statistically speaking, every club has had somebody chuck the toys out of the sandpit and say, well, screw you guys, I'm going to go and start my own club. My bat and my ball, and I'm going.
Yep. Dear. Anyway, so yes, never a dull moment.
No, and it's funny how often bloody conflict comes up, and it's, people say it's a personality clash. It's not a personality clash. You just hate his freaking guts. Just call it how it is.
And the feeling's probably mutual.
Probably mutual. Yeah, I said that to a president last week or the week before. And they said, no, Michael, no, they tell me that they hate my guts. At least, and I said, well, at least they call it how it is for once. We'll do it. And then how often you see in constitutions those clauses that say the maximum number of terms that somebody can have, and we look at it and say, so who were you trying to kick out at the time, but you didn't want to actually take action? You didn't want to put on your big boy or big girl pants and say, right, there we go, you're acting outside the best interests of our organisation here, so we're going to take some action.
Yep.
So I was reading, when did this come out? This is my local council magazine. So I figured that this episode might take the path of one of those awful early morning radio stations where you get 3 or 4 people who think they're really funny and they just read through the newspaper. I got to be honest, I haven't listened to commercial radio in probably 20 something years. And like now, like, isn't that why God invented Spotify? So I don't
Yep.
have to listen to commercial
It is
radio
exactly
anymore.
why.
And so, yeah, but I was reading to it and I was kind of getting a bit frustrated. Now, firstly, it's a glossy magazine, and this is where my rates go to a glossy magazine that typically just gets chucked out. When I was bitching about it at a meeting last week, somebody said, yeah, we've written to council so many times to say, stop sending us that stupid magazine. It's a waste of money. But basically what it does is it goes through the mayor and then each of the divisional councillors who get to tout what's going on that's so good in their area and what they're really proud of. And everything that I'm looking at, I'm kind of going, but hang on a minute. Like, it's almost everything. Sorry, there are some really good news stories in here and some typical roads, rates and rubbish type stories. But what gets me is, and there are a few actual stories in here that are frustrating for me because I know that there's more to the story that isn't making it in here. And that can be organizations that are getting money that might not necessarily have the wherewithal or business sense to do the best with that money. And again, now I'm trying to be careful and just I'm just posing some hypotheses here. I'm not saying that anyone's done anything wrong, but is it all the best use of our money, and is it telling us the full story? So in council land, and for all of our council listeners, you'll know this, it's community investment has its role or has its place in the pecking order. It's not first. Obviously, emergency relief is going to be first. So flood recovery, Steve, as you just mentioned before, when floods hit or when there's a disaster, a cyclone, natural disaster up north, and even in COVID, councils they came up with financial responses. So there were rates freezes at least, and in flood recovery, lots of grants. How many do you know that have just given grants or just got grants?
Plenty. Yeah.
And so that's fine. But what kind of got me as I'm reading through this is I know that community investment in my local council area is down the list. So we're going to have trunk infrastructure. We're going to have development. We're going to have BAU, the business as usual type operatings for council. And then investment in new sports facilities, new community facilities will happen, but it will happen when the money's there and it will happen when the time is right. Yet as I'm reading through this, that's what all of the councillors are saying they're so good about. So here's one about a pool. Here's one about inclusion and diversity among volunteer groups. Here's one about coming together. So volunteer groups getting together for flood recovery. There's some multicultural groups. There's another volunteer organization, a historical society type organization. There's okay. Now I'm hesitating here, Steve, because I'm actually finding some really good reports here about some events that are coming and some mental health initiatives. So all really good stuff. Some libraries. Here we go. That's good. Roads. There we go. Clubs. Again. Volunteer groups. Again. Volunteer groups. Again. Here's new park infrastructure. So new playground infrastructure and the story behind that. More flood recovery. More. Okay. Now we're talking about skate parks. Again.
And here are the good news stories, because really, if we quite literally talk about the important shit, so the trunk infrastructure by way of rising sewer mains and the like, that's not enjoyable to talk about. That's not sexy. That ain't going to win anyone votes. So,
so what you're saying is it's politics at play.
Oh, sorry. Did I imply that?
Sorry, here's a BMX park. Here's another sports club upgrades there.
So it's the stuff with which people connect because they're members of
League club story,
in
hot rod club, another park. Oh no, here's one about major road upgrades. Yeah, but there's no pretty pictures. There's no pretty pictures of playground infrastructure.
Still no shit pipes. No.
Oh, and there we go. There's a story about waste collection on the very last page. There we go. So I guess that really where I was going with it, Steve, was that it was a little bit frustrating to see all of that touting how good we are in investing in community infrastructure, yet it's such a small portion of council's budget. And for some councils, I know that the officers who are putting up projects have to fight tooth and nail just to get heard. And sometimes then the projects that do get up are not necessarily the best projects. So you know of projects and I know of projects that are what I'll call a compromise project. So there are some in the community. So we as community planners and we as sport and recreation planners, we have our finger on lots of pulses. So we have a finger on the pulse of what makes a difference. So what sort of level of infrastructure is actually going to make a difference if you're talking of sport in particular at a particular level. So we know for state level tournaments or state level competitions, what level of infrastructure is required for them to work, and not to work to minimum standards, but to work to a point where not only are we talking that we're going to make the people who use these grounds really comfortable every week or every day that they use them, but when people come here, they're going to be very comfortable at this venue. There's going to be great fields, great or courts, pools, whatever, great lights, but there's also very comfortable change rooms, clean dunnies, good service, so canteen areas, bar areas, if it's a licensed venue, nice big car parks, good signage, easy accessibility, good disability access to the whole facility, pathways around the park, maybe some exercise stations, play equipment, maybe a dog off leash area, depending on the neighborhood. So we know what makes a good park function like that. But we also know where those sorts of parks are needed, because we know what level of analysis to do at a national level to look at participation rates at a national level, but then also at a local level. How are these participation rates playing out locally? What are the popular sports? What are the popular activities here? And that can be historically, because we are in a community where a particular famous person, famous athlete grew up, and so their sport is obviously more common here because that's our town. And so we then know how to apply those. So we know what's needed, but then sometimes what can happen is the things that don't necessarily fit the bill. So the things that don't have those trends that, as genuine evidence, take precedence for political reasons. So, but it's popular. So we've got this noisy community, a vocal minority who really wants something to happen, or more often something not to happen. And there's a bit of pandering that goes on there. So the politics comes to the fore. And even where we do get things built in the right place and even the right things, sometimes there has to be a compromise. So a compromise to me is a bad outcome of negotiation, because it's like I say, hey, I want to wear my black shoes tonight. My wife says, yeah, but I like your brown shoes better. So we compromise and I wear one black and one brown. Now that's a worse outcome than either column A or
doing
column
as
B.
you're told. That's a much worse outcome than doing as you're told. For our listeners, just do as you're told. Wear the brown shoes.
Yes. So so when we get those compromised facilities, so they very often become white elephants. And so we saw this with a lot of halls that were built in schools with money that was available. And I know of one that is I forget the number, but I'm going to say 864 square meters or whatever it is, because if it was 865 square meters, then it would have needed a fire reticulation system built in,
right?
And it would have added to the cost. But now it's of a size that it's good for really big meetings. And in fact, it's terrible for really big meetings because it's so echoey inside. So it's kind of good for nothing. It's good for keeping the rain off on a rainy day to go and stand in there. But you can't play sport in there.
It was good for winning votes.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. So really, I'm kind of having a bit of a rant about things that are scoring political points for things that are low on the pecking order. But if they're
putting your money where your mouth is, then is that the follow on?
Yeah, but maybe not putting enough money where your mouth is. So if you're going to say that this is actually what's right, then let's do what's right. Let's take this back to first principles, and let's not just say, let's go and put a second field in with lights for that club because they're noisy. Is it actually needed there? How is that going to support the network? So when we talk, and this is fascinating, I said I wasn't very good at statistics, and that's why we've got a very good team of people who work with us on all of these sorts of projects, because we can see the picture that's required when we talk to the people, but it's important to check that against genuine need. So when somebody says, hey, if we don't have lights, we won't be able to play next year, I'm going to go, well, hang on a minute.
Why haven't you been putting your own money aside to replace those lights when necessary to ensure that you can continue to host games?
You're even being more charitable than me, Steve, because what I was going to say was, well, hang on, can't you play football in the daytime anymore?
Oh, yeah.
What you need to play for, and I think I've said this before, what you need to play football is something to kick, someone to kick it with, and somewhere to kick it. That's what you need.
Yep.
But then there's obviously the level of embellishment that are wants, but those wants can be justified. because okay, yes, that's all we need to play football. But if we need to play club football, well, we're going to need a field with line marking and goalposts and nets. If we're then going to step up a level, and we're going to need change rooms. But then at what point do we say, yeah, but what the service that we are providing now to our customers is of a level. Now, whether that's because we're driving it like that, because that's the type of business that we want to create, or whether we're doing that in response to known demand, our customers telling us, but we want to progress into the next league. We want more training. We want better facilities. We want, so then great. Okay. So that's what we're responding to. Every case becomes stronger, though, when we can say, before we invest here, let's make sure it's right. Let's look at the broader network and make sure that our network planning is right. And also do that higher level statistical analysis as well. So we're not just responding to consultations, really, really important, but it's not all we're responding to. We're then testing that, because if we, through testing what people at this club are telling us that they want, then we go and test that and say, oh, but actually it would be better if we don't develop it here, but we develop it over at a different facility, because, and that might be for flooding. If we develop it here, it's going to be out of commission because it's in an overland flow path. So it's going to get sodden. So you won't be able to use it for another 16 times a year. Can you really afford to have another new field that's out for 16 rounds a year? Or are we better off putting it at an alternative site, which may then, and then it brings up the discussion about satellite venues, single clubs at multiple venues, or having a stronger network of facilities, which gives us a stronger competitive network as well.
I don't know if this is going to take us down a path other than that which you may or may not have had in mind anyway. But as you were talking about some of the prioritization of how and where money is spent, and confirming that there's actually real demonstrated need for investment in some infrastructure development, election commitments jumped into my mind. And we're heading into a federal election, come a couple of weeks out now.
Yep, 2 weeks.
And we're starting to see election commitments promoted through social media, traditional media. And it's the old federal MP or, candidate turning up at a local club and pledging some amount of money. And, we're working with an organization that's recently had a pledge of a couple of $1 million from the sitting member. Should he and, arguably his team be re-elected, he's committed a couple of $1 million towards the large-scale redevelopment of their existing facility. Now, this begs an important question, which is, if this is a project which has merit and for which there is demonstrated need, and the organisation is able to deliver on its promise of upgrading its facility in its planned way, why is it only at election time that that project should have funding allocated to it? And the answer is, it's not only election time, because we have established grant programs that run throughout the year in every state and territory. At local government level, we've got councils that run grants, and we've obviously got the federal government that offers grant funding to many sporting organisations out there across the country as well. But why is it only at election time that this project gets the attention that it deserves? And of course,
is this a rhetorical question, Steve? Or do you want me to...
Why don't you go ahead? Why don't you go ahead and tell everyone what you think?
It rhymes with moats, and it starts with V.
Does it rhyme with orc farrelling?
I was just thinking, instead of calling them grant programs, sometimes they should just call it the pork barrel fund. But then whoever's in power at any point, we've got a blue government at the moment. So the red team are yelling at them for what they're doing with the pork barrel fund. But then when the red team were in power, the blue team yelled at them for doing exactly the same thing. And so it's scoring points off scoring points. So yeah, I'll score points by pork barreling, and then you'll score points by having a go at me. But then when the shoe was on the other foot, as in if you were in power and I was the opposition, I'd be saying exactly the same thing to you. And at least I think that they're all good enough sports that at some level they know that.
Oh, absolutely. And for us, the sports rorts, in inverted commas, was not a surprise to us. And it wasn't a surprise really to a lot of people with whom we work. We know that this happens. We know that votes are won through the commitment of dollars to sexy projects which, will a building which will be built and a photo opportunity which will follow for the, photo opportunity which will precede the construction, which is the handover of the big check, and then a photo opportunity for, cutting the ribbon, unveiling the building, naming the building, opening the plaque, whatever it is. These are opportunities for political candidates and elected representatives to win
Score
votes
points.
and to get attention. Yeah. Yep, we know that.
But to clarify, though, I think that we weren't surprised that the pork barreling happens, and we weren't surprised at that process, but the bad stuff that went on behind the scenes. So the
nitty-gritty
for interest
Yep.
that weren't declared, and the people doing very dodgy things, that's unforgivable, and they've obviously gone. They're not in those positions anymore. Yeah, yep. Which is right. So I suppose there's a fine line then, isn't there? And sometimes
there is.
People only find out that they've crossed that line when they're well and truly on the other side.
Yeah. But for me, I think the really important question is, are we not placing sufficient emphasis on projects at the right time? So in light of what you've raised, are councils focusing, on in an investment sense on the important stuff, which is great. Yeah, we need trunk infrastructure, we need roads, we need, waste management services to be provided reliably and efficiently, and all of that really important, boring stuff that councils do. But then that they are winning favor with their constituents through promotion of all of the attractive stuff, which is, what you've rattled off from that magazine. And we see the same thing happen with people trying to, candidates trying to win votes. So why is it that, we don't have better partnerships maybe between the organizations that provide access to sporting activities at community infrastructure, sporting fields, courts, lakes, and so on, and councils? Why do we have this disconnect? And again, the problem that I think I see and you see and we are exposed to day in, day out is the dynamic nature of volunteer organizations that lead them often down the path of poor succession planning, poor business continuity, and therefore a pretty crappy approach to planning for the long-term provision of infrastructure.
Yeah, those are really, really good points, Steve. And I think to try and come to some takeaways from this episode, I think that that's a really important point. That I'm just going to show you a picture as I make this point. There's a picture of. Hang on,
is that a councillor?
Yeah. Park upgrades. There we go. And there's a picture of the park upgrades. It's literally one slide that looks like the sort of slide I would have slid down on when I was a kid.
That's the upgraded park?
I think so. Look, I hope not, but it's literally one. So my point there is that councillor is scoring lots of political or trying to score lots of political points and political favor by something that cost maybe a couple of grand, maybe a few $1,000s. Let's call it a few $1,000s. So that's pittance of an investment.
For context, it is a crap looking slide.
Yeah, like seriously, really crap. So I hope that it's not. I hope that that's the. Anyway, I think it is. I think it is the new. I think it is the new one. But that didn't cost a lot of money, and they're taking a lot of kudos from something that didn't cost a lot of money. And yes, what did cost a lot of money were the road resurfacing in streets leading up to that park. But again, that's not sexy. So if you're gonna, I suppose the point here, we're probably gonna get no traction here because politics is politics, and it's politicians are gonna be politicians. But if you're gonna score points out of it, then let's make sure that they are putting their money where their mouth is, in answer to your question, but maybe they're just not putting the right amount of money where their mouth is. And
maybe not strategically enough. Maybe it's the squeaky wheels that get the oil rather than.
But then you get the compromise because we're getting something that is not necessarily what's right. So that's the facility that doesn't get used for anything, like the hall that I talked about, or it's something that doesn't get used to capacity because you've built the wrong thing there. You built something in the wrong place because you didn't have a good enough plan.
So, I know you want to continue talking about takeaways, but can I just really quickly chuck in something else that's come to mind, which is funding programs? And you like the way I didn't wait.
Yeah. You're going to ask me a question. Maybe
I'm going to keep talking, and if I don't take a breath, then you won't be able to get your words in, and therefore I will keep the floor. So grant programs, and here in Queensland, we had an infrastructure program which was run last year by the state government, and it was shit. There was no opportunity for clubs to actually demonstrate the need for a project or their ability. Well, I mean, to a degree, they had, an opportunity to demonstrate their ability to deliver by pointing to good trading history and so on. But there was really little opportunity for an organisation to make their case for need. And my take on that assessment process is it was more just based on, well, did they tick the box? Has this organisation submitted a compliant application? Nevertheless, typically speaking, a funding program and the questions asked through the application process give a club or an association an opportunity to say, we need this project more than, enough other organisations applying for the same money because of this, this, and this. Therefore, give us the money so we can do the project and continue to or improve, continue to deliver the services that we provide or improve those services. And what has played on my mind for some of the many years that we've been working on funding applications is we know how to make a strong case. Some people who write grant applications within their clubs know how to make a strong case. Does that mean that their project is necessarily the most deserving or most necessary project across the local government area, across the state, across the country? And the answer is no, it doesn't necessarily mean that. So the clubs that have got, good people internally or that go and engage the support of people who know how to write grants will be more likely to win grants, not based on the actual genuine need for the project, but based on how they present the need.
But if they're doing their job right, then that would be part of it. Then being a good grant writer is telling the story and selling it because it's based on need. So if I'm writing a grant, then I'm going to go and do all of that research. So the only reason that a grant that I write is going to be successful is it's not just because I'm using lovely flowery language and talking about need that doesn't exist. I'm then demonstrating that need does exist by pointing back to network strategies and plans. And if a network strategy hasn't been done, then I would do it myself. And so boom, there's a map. Plotted on that map are all of the pins of the other networks and what they contain, and demonstrating that here is the right place, and then looking around and saying, well, here's the right place because this is the place that doesn't flood. Here is the right place because this is the place that has the deficit at the moment. This is the right place because here are our figures that are showing people are leaving. Here are our exit surveys that say people are leaving because they're going from us to another club that has these facilities. So we're bringing down the quality of competition because we can't keep up with what we can offer here, which means that other clubs can't compete because we can't play in a competition up. There's less in that competition. So now I'm creating that case. So I think a good grant writer is good, but only if they're doing their job right. Where I think it is a problem is where those things are happening politically, or somebody saying the squeaky wheel syndrome or the NIMBY syndrome. It says, let's do this because it's going to score political favor. Not let's do this because it is actually right. Sure, we're going to get political favor from it, but let's do it in the right place and the right way.
Yeah, and while I don't disagree at all with anything you've just said, and certainly, the case has to be there to be made before a grant writer can, whether they're internal or an engaged professional grant writer, before they can make that case, the case needs to exist. So there needs to be, a need to demonstrate.
Yeah.
Gosh, I said need a lot in that sentence, didn't I? I suppose where I was going with my point, though, is that there are plenty of organisations that A, don't know that grant funding exists, or B, know that grant funding exists, but by virtue of other challenges internally, typically not enough people to do the work, don't have the time to go and present a strong case through a grant application. And is that okay? And I know that I'm taking us on a tangent here from where we began, but again, I'll come back to that question, somewhat rhetorical, that I asked earlier. Should we have better partnerships between government and these organisations across the state and country that deliver sport, so that it's not just a matter of, okay, well, you wrote a good grant application, so you'll get the money, but rather an approach taken by government, which is this club that has no one to write a good grant needs some bloody money, or they're not going to be able to host training or competition or provide a safe opportunity for participation. So we need to do more to support that organisation.
They know that because they've been proactive in creating that connection and that partnership, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And look, I mean, I know that the point that I'm kind of making here flies in the face of some of what we say about organizations needing to do good business. Otherwise, to ensure their own long-term sustainability or viability. Otherwise, is that organization, are we just marking time? And
or building something that's going to end up going back into the mix and have to go into EOI for some other club to come and take over. And it might be a super club with satellite venues.
Yeah. Which, is that okay? And there are probably very good points to be made on both sides of that fence, but
yeah, case by case, but do the assessment. And does it work in this community? Does it fit with, what I said about the communities that have their pet athletes and therefore their pet sports?
Yes. Yep.
Yep. All right. So I got some takeaways for you, Steve.
Good. I don't. Hit me.
Believe it or not, it's going to turn out to be not just a whinge fest. Okay. So firstly, this is advice to our council friends. Invest right, invest the right amount of money in the right place in the right project. And how you do that is based on good planning that is informed by genuine need. So the way that we talk about that in the work that we do is obviously you start with need, understand genuine need. And that's that process of that proper data-driven process that I talked about that is then supported by community engagement. I would strongly advocate for doing them both, though, because if you just do it one way and you just go and create a network strategy, and I know some state sports that have done this, they just created a network strategy by interviewing all of the clubs in their network and saying, hey, what do you want? And then creating a plan that was just a big wish list of everything that they wanted. Now, that did work because then for some councils that looked at it, they said, oh, we can go and just plonk some money there because we've got a wish list. So they did. So that worked in their favor. But again, is it just creating more white elephants? And that's my concern, because if you go and build a building in the wrong spot, then it limits your ability to build it in the right spot down the track, and it limits your ability to build the right thing in that place. So you put a clubhouse here and then you work out, oh, that would have actually been a really good place for our second field or our synthetic field or our whatever it is, our rage cage. And now we can't without knocking down a building and then reinvesting. And so you then wait the 50 years until that building reaches its end of its useful life. And then we knock it down and then we build what's right. But in the meantime, how many generations of kids playing sport have had substandard facilities just because something was built by compromise or built by political will instead? Which leads me to takeaway number 2, which is that for the most part, we're not talking to the decision makers. And even if you are a councillor or a mayor, then you are one decision maker in a group of many. The important takeaway number 2 is to push the right things in the right direction. So if you are a councillor, then come time for decision making, yes, score your political points, but how much better will it be if you can say genuinely hand on heart? I shouldn't laugh. If I can say honestly, oh God, I'm not a politician.
Someone once told me never to trust someone who says, honestly,
yeah. To be
honest.
But if you can genuinely stand hand on heart and say, but this is supported by need, and here is the evidence, and that evidence is defensible. It's not just, but Sammy told us, but Paulie told us, this is genuine defensible need because it's based on this level of proper statistical analysis that we've done. If you are a person who works in a council, so you're not one of the decision makers, then have the courage to push the right projects through. And don't give up. And I know that this is true in large-scale bureaucracies where there are some people who deliberately won't escalate projects because they are a threat. I'm very happy in my bureau, and I'm talking to obviously none of our friends, Steve. I'm in a managerial or a directorship portfolio in a council, and it's what I've read in a great book, Road Warriors, retired on active duty. So they're just sitting there until retired. They're getting paid until they retire, but they're not doing anything. They're just sitting on their bums. And anyone underneath them who is ambitious and is pushing and has this sort of background can be seen as a threat, and then their life can be made difficult. And I know of cases in too many councils where I've seen that. So if you are one of those people, please stop being a dickhead. And if you are one of those, people who is trying to push, then have the courage to push what's right. But if you're doing the job that's right, and this is our bread and butter, this is what we do in CPR group planning, day in, day out. So we know what it takes. We're very happy to engage with you on what it takes and to have some of those off the record discussions that we obviously need to have, recognizing that this discussion started around conflict again. So how do you deal with that internal conflict? And managing the humans is always the problem in every job. This job would be great if it wasn't for the customers and the staff.
Yep.
And the final one then is on your point about partnerships. And I'm going to add a layer to that to say when we're investing the right money in the right projects in the right places, I'm going to expand that out to say we're not just talking about capital investment here. We're also talking about investing in capacity. So invest in capacity building so that when you are inside, just to jump back to the pushing one, if you're outside of a council, so if you are a club and you've got the right project, then don't just base it on what we want. Go and do really take an objective step back and say, what is it how would this be viewed by somebody else? How would a consultant plan for this? And do some of that planning. All of those things that we talked about. What is the need at a national level? How does that manifest locally? What are the trends that we're seeing? And map that so that it's defensible and so that it's then open to scrutiny. And if somebody comes along and says, but you should have used this information, don't say poo to you. Say, well, maybe there's something in that and there's something else, there's more for you to do. Now, I know that can be time consuming, which is why most people choose to outsource it, but it's well worth the investment because if you get what's right, then you don't have to spend that 50 years on a shitty park that's got the wrong thing in the wrong place. So then on the capacity and connection side, it includes then those, if you're within a council, being proactive in creating good relationships with the volunteers, typically the mums and dads who are running our clubs, our community infrastructure, create good relationships with them. And for the most part, you want to be supporting them. Yes, if they're dodgy and if they're doing a bad job, then move them on. But far better that you give them the opportunity to be the proper steward of the land that you've given to them and do the best job that they can and to support them in doing that. And then the capacity enables you to create that connection. So that's what I wrote down. Capacity, connection, and all of that is built through partnerships.
Great. And on the partnership point, for our club listeners, I'm pretty sure that we've touched on this previously, but establish positive working partnerships with your lessor or, with your council, but also with local, state and federal politicians. Establish those positive partnerships because you're likely one of many organizations within your constituency. So make sure that you take a proactive approach to creating those partnerships from the bottom up as well.
Yeah.
Don't just rely on council to do that. But certainly, yes, as you say, for our council listeners, similarly apply a proactive approach to those partnerships.
Yeah. Yep.
Because they're helping you do your job and vice versa.
Yeah.
So better partnerships.
Great stuff. Great stuff.
Better outcomes. Good.
There we go. I think we did finally end this journey.
You did a great job of tying it back to what we should have been talking about. Yeah.
you can see that, like most things that we talk about on this bloody podcast, Steve, that there's so many forks that you can, or branches. And you got your trunk here, and then you go out on a limb, and then that becomes a smaller branch, and then you end up on twigs and leaves of so many different topics that all tie together in some way to people being dicks.
Or basket Casey. Yes.
Basket Casey, yeah, no. And yes. So yes, all kudos to councils who are investing well. And I know that I hung some shit on council for maybe not investing as much or as well, but look, this is the sexy stuff. So if we just take that to a level of honesty and saying, yeah, this is what we're going to invest in, and we've got a good plan and we're looking into the future and we know that that is going to service genuine need, then everyone does better, including the politicians getting re-elected.
Yes.
The right ones. What do they say? We get the politicians we deserve or something. I don't know. Anyway, so on that note, I'm going to say that I, at this stage, at least, have zero desire to be in politics in any way, shape or form. And so that the people who are running in a couple of weeks, all the best. And
you can have
whoever gets in, you can have it. Absolutely. Steve, thank you very much to you for joining me on this little romp down a number of rabbit warrens and indeed leading a few of those rabbit warrens, particularly the grant one. I thought that was interesting and a bit of a different take than some of the other great stuff we've talked about.
And thank you for the opportunity to take you down some of those warrens. Ramble.
We didn't get lost. We came out the other side. Big thanks to Jess, our producer and our editor, for all the wonderful work that she does, cutting out the crap that you didn't want to hear anyway. Obviously, follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter, and send us a good old-fashioned emails. If you write us a handwritten note, we'll probably even read it. We'll probably reply. And of course, you can give us a phone call as well, all of which is available on our website, cprgroup.com.au.
Maybe we should start a new segment of our show called Basket Case Confidential, where we get our listeners to write a little note into us for sharing on the podcast.
Oh, good idea.
I'll tell you what, let's put the call out and see if anyone takes us up on the offer.
Basket Case Confidential. All right. Yes. Nice. Let's see what we get. Nice work, Steve. All right. Thank you again, Steve. I'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.